Play the piece, Miss Albright. The one we agreed upon. Just the simple one. I can't. Not anymore. Not after what they did to Captain Maris. In the heart of Oakhaven, a small coastal town clinging fiercely to its traditions, a profound injustice has cast a long, cold shadow. Clara Albright, a young woman whose piano once filled the town with joy, finds herself caught between the crushing weight of grief and the subtle, insidious power of those who seek to silence dissent. Ordered to perform a bland, prescribed melody at a community event designed to whitewash a recent tragedy, Clara faces an impossible choice. But the memory of Captain Maris, a beloved fisherman unjustly broken, and the silent anguish of her neighbors ignites a fire within her. In a moment of defiant artistic rebellion, Clara will unleash a piano masterpiece, a spontaneous symphony of sorrow, anger, and unwavering hope that will not only expose the truth, but also stir the slumbering spirit of a town ready to reclaim its voice. This is a story about the extraordinary power of music to mend broken hearts, to challenge oppression, and to inspire a community to fight for the future it deserves. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day, and drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. Play the piece, Miss Albright, the one we agreed upon, just the simple one. Mr. Sterling's voice, usually a booming resonance that filled the Oakhaven Town Hall during council meetings, was now a low, menacing rumble, barely audible above the clinking of cutlery from the kitchen. It was meant to be a private moment, a final warning delivered with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Clara Albright, perched on the velvet bench before the grand piano, felt the words like a physical weight, pressing down on her, trying to flatten the burgeoning defiance in her soul. "I can't," she replied, her voice softer than his, but laced with an unyielding steel that surprised even herself. "Not anymore. Not after what they did to Captain Maris." Mr. Sterling's smile faltered, a fleeting crack in his polished composure. He adjusted the cuff of his impeccably tailored suit, a nervous habit that betrayed the authority he so carefully cultivated. "Miss Albright," he began, his tone now a blend of condescension and thinly veiled threat. "This is the Oakhaven Unity Gala. We are here to heal, to move forward. The piece you signed off on, Morning Serenade, is perfect. Light, uplifting, uncontroversial. Precisely what this town needs." Clara's gaze drifted past him, out the tall, arched windows of the town hall's main assembly room, where the last sliver of an autumn sunset painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Oakhaven. Her Oakhaven. She'd arrived here 5 years ago, a transplant from the clamor of the city, drawn by the quiet promise of salt-laced air and the rhythmic lull of the Atlantic. She'd found more than just peace. She'd found family, a community whose roots ran as deep as the ancient oak trees lining its main street. She taught piano lessons in a sun-drenched studio overlooking the harbor, played at Sunday services, and knew every face, every story that walked through the winding lanes of this beautiful, unassuming town. But Oakhaven was not beautiful now. Not truly. A pall had settled over it, a collective ache that vibrated just beneath the surface of polite greetings and forced smiles. It had been 3 months since Captain Silas Maris, a man whose hands were as gnarled and strong as the ropes he handled, a man whose laughter had once boomed across the docks, suffered a catastrophic stroke. 3 months since his life, and the life of his family, had been irrevocably shattered. The official story, championed by Mr. Sterling and his powerful associates on the town council, was that Captain Maris's health had simply failed him. A tragic, unfortunate event. But Clara, and every soul who truly called Oakhaven home, knew the insidious truth. Captain Maris had been the loudest, most persistent voice against the expansion of the Oakhaven Bay Dredging Company, a conglomerate with deep pockets and even deeper political ties, rumored to be a front for offshore drilling interests. Maris had presented evidence, documents, photos, eyewitness accounts of their illegal dumping of waste into the pristine fishing grounds, threatening Oakhaven's very lifeblood. He spoke at every council meeting, rallied the other fishermen, and dared to stand up to a power far greater than himself. Then, swift and cruel, came the retaliation. His fishing license, a document he'd held for over 40 years, was suddenly revoked on an obscure technicality. His beloved boat, the Sea Spirit, was impounded, its repairs deemed non-compliant. Crippling fines followed, manufactured from thin air. The stress, the humiliation, the injustice, it had been a slow, agonizing suffocation for a man who had only ever known the open sea and honest labor. The stroke wasn't an act of God. It was an act of calculated cruelty, and everyone knew it. This gala, Mr. Sterling continued, oblivious to the storm brewing behind Clara's quiet facade, is a testament to our resilience, to our ability to come together. Your music, Miss Albright, is a crucial part of that narrative. Narrative. The word hung in the air, a sour taste on Clara's tongue. It wasn't about truth. It was about control, about burying the real story under a blanket of manufactured unity. Her fingers, usually so nimble and confident, trembled slightly as she rested them on the cool ivory keys. The piano, a venerable old Steinway that had seen generations of Oakhaven's joys and sorrows, felt heavy, imbued with the unspoken grief of the town. She'd spent weeks practicing Morning Serenade, a pleasant, technically undemanding piece that flowed like a gentle stream. It was meant to soothe, to lull, to allow people to forget, just for a little while. But how could she play a melody of forgetfulness when the town was screaming in silent pain? Later that evening, after Mr. Sterling had finally, reluctantly, excused himself to greet the first arriving guests, Clara sought refuge backstage in a small, cramped room. Eleanor Vance, her oldest and dearest friend in Oakhaven, a retired English teacher with eyes that missed nothing, was there, adjusting a vase of mums. "He got to you, didn't he?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but knowing. Clara nodded, sinking onto a worn armchair. "He wants Morning Serenade. He wants me to be part of his charade, to make it all seem okay." Eleanor sighed, a sound heavy with the weariness of age and accumulated wisdom. "This town, it's been through so much. They think by putting on a good face, by playing the right tune, they can wish the bitterness away." "But it won't go away, Eleanor," Clara insisted, her voice rising with a passion she rarely showed. "It just burrows deeper. Captain Maris, his wife Martha, she looks at me with such emptiness in her eyes. How can I play something so saccharine when her heart is breaking, when our harbor is slowly being poisoned?" Eleanor sat beside her, taking Clara's hand. Her touch was warm, reassuring. "You have a gift, Clara, a true gift. Music isn't just notes on a page, it's a language. Sometimes it's the only language that can speak the truth." She squeezed Clara's hand. "But choosing to speak that truth, especially tonight, means facing down a very powerful silence. Are you ready for that?" Clara looked into Eleanor's steady eyes. The weight of Mr. Sterling's expectations, the committee's carefully constructed narrative, the fear of retribution, it was all very real. but so was the memory of Captain Maris's resolute face, the quiet dignity of Martha's suffering, the fear in the eyes of the other fishermen who now dared not speak, and so was the profound, aching need within her own heart to simply be heard, to lend her voice, her art, to a cause far greater than her own comfort. A polite cough sounded at the door. It was the stage manager, a nervous young man, peeking in. 5 minutes, Miss Albright. The hall is nearly full. Clara stood, a sudden calm settling over her. She walked back to the piano, the murmur of the assembling crowd a low hum in the distance. The stage lights, warm and inviting, illuminated the keys. Her sheet music for Morning Serenade lay open on the stand, its familiar notes seeming to mock her with their bland simplicity. She glanced at the faces in the front rows, Mr. Sterling and his cohort, beaming, confident in their control. Then she looked further back, searching for the tired, hopeful faces of the townspeople, the ones who carried the true weight of Oakhaven on their shoulders. She saw Martha Maris, a solitary figure in black, her gaze fixed on Clara, a breath caught in Clara's throat. No, she couldn't. Not this song. Her fingers hovered over the keys, a silent prayer forming in her heart. She looked down at the sheet music, then, with a quiet certainty, reached out and slowly, deliberately closed the book. The faint rustle of the paper was a tiny whisper of rebellion in the vast, expectant silence of the hall. The whisper of the sheet music closing echoed through the suddenly hushed hall, a tiny, defiant rebellion against the polished silence. Mr. Sterling, poised to take the stage and deliver his opening remarks, froze. His eyes, fixed on Clara, narrowed to slivers of cold fury. A gasp rippled through the front rows. The carefully constructed facade of the Oakhaven Unity Gala cracked, just for a breath. Clara felt the eyes of hundreds upon her, a mixture of confusion, expectation, and from some corners, a dawning comprehension. Her fingers, despite the tremor in her heart, found their way to the keys. She didn't consciously choose the notes. They simply rose from within her, a raw, untamed current. It began with a low, mournful drone, like the distant, lonely call of a foghorn on a starless night. It was the sound of the sea's relentless sorrow, the quiet lament of fishermen watching their livelihoods disappear, the heavy sigh of a town struggling to breathe. There was no gentle melody, no light morning serenade here. This was a dirge, a eulogy for a man, Captain Maris, and for the purity of a bay now threatened. The melody swelled, gaining a haunting depth, pulling at the threads of unspoken grief that bound Oakhaven together. Clara saw faces in the crowd shift, first confusion, then a flicker of recognition, then a tightening around lips, a moistness in eyes. This wasn't just music. It was a mirror, reflecting their collective pain. The rhythmic, almost insistent beat that emerged next mimicked the creak of old fishing boats against the dock, the tireless work of hands weathered by salt and sun. It spoke of hard lives, honest labor, and the quiet dignity of a community that had always asked for nothing more than the right to survive. Her gaze met Martha Maris's. Martha, a solitary figure in the third row, her face etched with a grief so profound it seemed to have stolen her very breath, now had tears tracking silent paths down her cheeks. But in those tears, Clara saw not just sorrow, but a flicker of something else, understanding, perhaps even a nascent spark of hope. The music was a lifeline, connecting their two shattered hearts across the expanse of the elegant hall. Mr. Sterling, recovering from his initial shock, finally stirred. He began to rise, his face a mask of scarlet indignation, his mouth opening to deliver a harsh, cutting command. But the sound, the sheer, undeniable power of Clara's spontaneous composition, held him captive, as if an invisible force pressed him back into his velvet seat. The stage manager, a young man named Tommy, usually quick to obey Mr. Sterling's every nod, stood frozen in the wings, his eyes wide, mesmerized by the unfolding drama and the raw beauty of the sound. He'd never heard Miss Albright play like this. No one in Oakhaven had. The music shifted again, transforming from a mournful lament into something fierce, almost tempestuous. It became the crashing of waves against the breakwater during a storm, the defiant cry of gulls against a darkening sky. It was the anger, the frustration, the quiet rage that simmered beneath Oakhaven's polite surface, now given voice. Clara's fingers danced, blurring across the keys, each note a declaration, each chord a plea. She played not just with skill, but with a piece of her very soul, pouring her conviction into every resonant vibration. She played for Captain Maris, for Martha, for the threatened bay, for the unspoken longing of every Oakhaven soul to be heard. A hush had fallen over the entire hall, so absolute that the distant rush of the ocean could almost be imagined. No one clinked glasses, no one whispered. They simply listened, their hearts laid bare by the raw honesty of the sound. As the final lingering notes faded, dissolving into the vast silence of the hall, Clara's hands dropped from the keys, trembling. She sat utterly still, her chest heaving, her eyes closed, afraid to open them and face the aftermath of her defiant act. She expected anger, outrage, perhaps even an order to leave. Instead, a single clap echoed through the silence. It was Eleanor Vance standing in the back, her face radiant with pride and a knowing smile. Then, another clap, from a younger fisherman near the aisle, then a ripple growing quickly, building into a thunderous wave. The entire room erupted into applause, not the polite, measured kind reserved for gala performances, but a visceral, heartfelt ovation. People rose to their feet, their faces alight with an emotion Clara couldn't quite name, but recognized as hope. It was a roar of affirmation, a collective release of pent-up emotion. Martha Maris, her tears still flowing, pushed past the seated guests and slowly made her way towards the stage. Her eyes, which had held such unbearable emptiness for months, now held a glint of something powerful, something resurrected. She reached the edge of the stage, her gaze meeting Clara's. Without a word, she simply nodded, a slow, profound gesture of gratitude and solidarity. Clara, overwhelmed, felt tears sting her own eyes. She had spoken the truth, not with words, but with sound, and her community had heard her. But the moment of triumph was fleeting. Through the standing ovation, through the tears and the burgeoning hope, Clara saw Mr. Sterling. He had not joined the applause. He stood rigidly, his face contorted into a mask of barely controlled fury, his eyes burning into hers with a chilling intensity that promised a reckoning. He raised a hand, not in applause, but to slowly, deliberately take out his phone. He held it up, snapped a quick photo of Clara, and then, with a smile that was utterly devoid of warmth, whispered just loud enough for her to catch the words. "Enjoy the applause, Miss Albright. You've just played your last note in Oakhaven." Mr. Sterling's words. "Enjoy the applause, Miss Albright. You've just played your last note in Oakhaven," sliced through the roaring ovation like a cold blade. Clara saw him turn, his back stiff with indignation, and stride purposefully towards the side exit, his phone still clutched in his hand. The subtle implication of his gaze, the chilling certainty in his tone, extinguished the warmth of the applause that still pulsed around her. The standing ovation continued for a moment, an oblivious celebration. But for Clara, the joy had already curdled into a bitter premonition. She slowly rose from the piano bench, her legs suddenly weak, the adrenaline draining from her system. The weight of what she had done, the magnitude of her defiance, settled upon her shoulders. This wasn't just about a performance anymore. It was about the very fabric of her life in Oakhaven. Eleanor Vance was the first to reach her, pushing through the last stragglers of the applauding crowd. Her eyes, usually so shrewd, were now brimming with unshed tears, but her grip on Clara's arm was firm, a silent anchor. "Clara," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion, "that was magnificent, but it came at a cost." "I know," Clara murmured, her gaze drawn to Martha Maris, who was still standing at the edge of the stage, her silent nod more powerful than any words. The applause finally began to die down, replaced by a murmur of excited chatter, speculation, and a palpable sense of unease. The crowd, suddenly aware of Mr. Sterling's abrupt departure, sensed the unspoken conflict. Tommy, the nervous stage manager, finally found his voice, rushing over. "Miss Albright, Mr. Sterling just informed me to inform you that your services for all future town events are no longer required. And he mentioned something about your studio lease being reviewed." Tommy wrung his hands, his face pale with worry. He seemed very upset. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air seeping in from outside. Her piano studio, a charming space above Miller's Antiques, was her livelihood, her sanctuary. The lease, secured through a friend of Mr. Sterling's, was now clearly a point of leverage. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was an economic eviction. "He's starting already," Clara said, her voice flat. She had expected this intellectually, but the immediate surgical precision of his retaliation was still a punch to the gut. Martha Maris finally approached, her footsteps slow but deliberate. Her eyes, though still shadowed by grief, held a newfound resolve. She took Clara's hand, her gnarled fingers surprisingly warm. "He won't silence you, child," Martha said, her voice raspy, a ghost of her former strength. "Not after that. You gave Silas a voice tonight. You gave all of us a voice." The sincerity in Martha's eyes was a balm to Clara's wounded spirit. This was why she'd played. This was the hope she'd ignited. But the fight was only just beginning. The next morning, the silence of Oakhaven was more oppressive than usual. Clara's phone, usually buzzing with lesson requests, was eerily quiet. A letter had already arrived, hand-delivered by a stony-faced messenger from the town council. A formal notice of lease review for her studio, citing a fabricated clause about disruption of public order. It was a thinly veiled threat, a paper weapon aimed directly at her ability to earn a living. Later that day, a young mother, Sarah Jenkins, hesitantly called to cancel her daughter Lily's piano lessons. "I'm so sorry, Clara." Sarah's voice trembled. "Mr. Sterling's wife, she's on the school board. She suggested it might be best for Lily to find a new teacher. Something about unsuitable influences." Each cancellation, each veiled threat, was a blow. Clara saw the fear, the insidious power Mr. Sterling wielded through his connections and influence. He was effectively cutting her off, isolating her, making an example of her. The inspiration of the previous night's performance now seemed a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Could she truly stand against such a formidable, entrenched power? She walked down to the harbor, the bracing wind doing little to clear the cloud of worry that hung over her. The fishing boats, usually a vibrant sight, looked subdued, many tied up, some with for sale signs quietly tacked to their masts. The dredging company's monstrous vessel, the Oak Haven Guardian, ironically named, sat like a dark beast in the distance, its mechanical arm ominously poised. As she watched the waves, a figure emerged from the shadows of an old bait shop. It was Ben Carter, one of the younger fishermen, known for his quiet demeanor but fierce loyalty to Captain Maris. He approached her, his hands tucked deep into his pockets. "Clara," he said, his voice low. "We heard about the studio, about Sterling." Clara nodded, bracing herself for another cancellation, another message of fear. But Ben's gaze was steady. "My son Liam, he loves your lessons. He looks forward to them more than anything." He paused, then took a deep breath. "He won't be canceling. In fact, if you need a new space to teach, I've got an old storage shed near the docks. It's not much, but it's ours, and Sterling can't touch it." Clara stared at him, a sudden surge of warmth spreading through her chest, pushing back against the encroaching chill. It was a small gesture, almost insignificant in the face of Mr. Sterling's might, but it was a lifeline. It was a declaration. "Thank you, Ben," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. He offered a rare, small smile. "You spoke for us, Clara. Now it's our turn." He glanced towards the Oak Haven Guardian, a hardened glint in his eyes. "Sterling thinks he can cut you off, silence us one by one. But he underestimated something. He underestimated the anger, and he underestimated the strength of a silent tide, once it decides to rise." Just then, a sleek black car, unmistakably Mr. Sterling's, pulled up to the main dock. He stepped out, accompanied by two stern-faced men in dark suits, clearly not locals. They pointed towards the Sea Spirit, Captain Maris's impounded boat, which still sat forlornly in its slip. One of the men produced a clipboard, and Mr. Sterling, with a triumphant smirk, gestured towards the vessel. Clara felt a fresh wave of dread. They weren't just attacking her livelihood. They were moving to erase every trace of Captain Maris's legacy, to ensure his story was buried for good. What was Sterling planning now? And how far would he go to secure his absolute control over Oak Haven? The sight of Mr. Sterling, those grim-faced men, and the clipboard pointed at the Sea Spirit sent a fresh wave of ice through Clara. This wasn't just about silencing Captain Maris's voice. It was about erasing his very presence, destroying his legacy. Ben Carter beside her stiffened, his jaw tightening. "They're going to scrap her," he muttered, his voice raw with a grief that went beyond mere sentimentality. "They're going to break up his boat, turn it into kindling. It's the ultimate insult." The implications were chilling. The Sea Spirit wasn't just wood and metal. It was a symbol, the heart of Captain Maris's life, a testament to Oak Haven's fishing heritage. To destroy it now, after what had happened, was a brutal act of psychological warfare, designed to crush any lingering hope of defiance. Clara felt a profound ache in her chest. She looked at Ben, then back at the ominous tableau unfolding on the dock. "We can't let them," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We simply cannot." Ben's eyes met hers, and in their depths, Clara saw a desperate resolve mirroring her own. "What can we do, Clara? They've got the law on their side, all their paperwork. We've fought them every step of the way on this, and they just laugh." He gestured helplessly towards Mr. Sterling, who was now exchanging what looked like celebratory handshakes with the suited men. A sudden, sharp memory flashed through Clara's mind. Martha Maris's face, etched with despair. But then, a flicker of defiance when Clara played, the quiet strength of Eleanor's belief, Ben's offer of the shed, the small, scattered acts of resistance that were slowly forming a fragile network. The law might be on their side, Clara said, her mind racing. But what about public opinion? What about the truth? She thought of the raw emotion she'd tapped into at the gala. They want to make an example of Captain Maris. What if we make an example of them? Before Ben could respond, Mr. Sterling and his entourage started towards a luxury SUV parked nearby, clearly finished with their grim task. As they passed, Mr. Sterling paused, his eyes sweeping over Clara and Ben with a cold, triumphant glint. He didn't speak, but his condescending smile was a declaration of victory, a final assertion of his absolute power. He knew they'd seen. He wanted them to see. That night, the small, cramped storage shed Ben had offered became the unlikely hub of a nascent rebellion. Eleanor Vance, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, sat on an overturned crate, carefully reviewing documents. Ben and a few other younger fishermen, their faces grim, huddled around a flickering lantern, whispering strategy. Martha Maris sat quietly in a corner, her presence a powerful, silent reminder of what they were fighting for. "They've pushed the boat's demolition date up," Eleanor announced, her voice tight. "Tomorrow morning. First light. They want it done before anyone can organize a proper protest." A collective gasp went through the small group. "Tomorrow?" Ben exclaimed. "That's barely 12 hours? What can we do in 12 hours?" Clara looked at the faces around her, tired, worried, but no longer defeated. "We can make some noise," she said, her voice steady. "We can make sure everyone in Oakhaven knows what they're doing, and we can give them something to think about." She turned to Ben. "The news stations, local papers. Do we have any contacts? Anyone who isn't already beholden to Sterling?" Ben scratched his head. "There's that independent blogger, Oakhaven Observer. She's always digging up dirt. And a young reporter at the Oakhaven Weekly, who actually cares." "Get them," Clara urged. "Tell them what's happening. Tell them to be there at first light." She then turned to Martha. "Martha, would you be willing to speak? To tell your story? About Silas? About the injustice?" Martha's eyes, still red-rimmed, slowly met Clara's. Her lips trembled, but then she took a deep, shuddering breath. "For Silas," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "I will speak." Eleanor, ever practical, pulled out a small notepad. "All right, I'll start calling every name in my address book. Neighbors, friends, anyone who cares about Oakhaven. We need bodies on that dock. A peaceful protest, but a visible one." The shed buzzed with renewed purpose. Fear still lingered, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful surge of collective will. Clara, usually the quiet musician, found herself directing, coordinating, her mind clear and focused. This was a different kind of performance, a different kind of composition. As the meeting wound down, Eleanor pulled Clara aside. "You know, dear," she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "your piano performance, it's still being talked about. It sparked something. What if we amplify that spark?" Clara looked at her, a question in her eyes. "What if," Eleanor continued, "we turn this protest into more than just placards and speeches? What if we remind them all, one more time, of the true soul of Oakhaven? The one you played that night?" A thrill shot through Clara. "Are you suggesting—" Eleanor simply smiled, a conspiratorial glint in her eyes. "There's an old, upright piano in the back of the church hall, been there for decades. Out of tune, probably needs some work, but it's sturdy, and portable. She paused, her gaze fixed on Clara. Do you think you could play it on the docks at first light? The idea was audacious, reckless, bordering on insane. To bring a piano, to play amidst a protest, with Mr. Sterling and his men undoubtedly watching, was an even greater act of defiance than the gala. It meant putting herself and everyone involved directly in the line of fire. But as Clara envisioned it, the mournful, defiant notes mingling with the shouts of protest, the crashing waves, and the grim reality of the sea spirit's impending destruction, a powerful image solidified in her mind. This wasn't just about saving a boat. It was about reclaiming their narrative, their spirit. Yes, Clara breathed, a fierce determination igniting within her. Yes, I can play it. But as she spoke, a new challenge emerged. Ben rushed back into the shed, his phone clutched in his hand, his face pale. Clara, Eleanor, you won't believe this, he stammered. I just got a call from the Oakhaven Observer blogger. They're reporting that the dredging company just released a statement saying Captain Maris's stroke wasn't natural. They're claiming it was caused by an illegal drug overdose, and that the sea spirit was used for smuggling. They're trying to completely discredit him, to bury his name in shame before we even get a chance to protest the boat. The new accusation, a vicious, calculated smear, hung heavy in the air, a final, cruel twist designed to destroy not just Captain Maris's legacy, but his very character. They're trying to turn everyone against him, against us, Ben whispered, the gravity of the false claim sinking in. How do we fight that? The accusation, an illegal drug overdose, smuggling on the sea spirit, hit Clara like a physical blow, silencing the shed. Ben's phone, still clutched in his hand, seemed to vibrate with the insidious power of the lie. The audacity, the sheer cruelty of the dredging company's counterattack was breathtaking. It wasn't just about destroying a boat now. It was about destroying a man's reputation, dragging his name through the mud, and turning the town against him, and by extension, against anyone who dared to defend him. Martha Maris, who had been sitting quietly, listening, let out a small, strangled cry. Her face, already pale with grief, drained to an ashen white. Silas? Smuggling? She whispered, her voice cracking with indignation and pain. He lived for that boat, for this town. He couldn't. Eleanor Vance, ever the pragmatist, slammed her fist lightly on the overturned crate. That's exactly their game. Discredit the victim, demonize the opposition. They want to turn this into a smear campaign, make people doubt Silas, doubt us. She looked at Clara, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. This is psychological warfare, pure and simple. If people believe Silas was a criminal, then his death becomes less tragic, his protests less credible, and our fight becomes meaningless. The air in the cramped shed grew thick with despair. How do you fight a lie that's broadcast by a powerful corporation, amplified by the local rumor mill, and designed to prey on fear and suspicion? How do you defend the honor of a man who can no longer defend himself? Clara felt the familiar chill of anxiety creep back in, threatening to overwhelm her newfound resolve. But then she looked at Martha, her frail shoulders shaking with a grief compounded by insult. She looked at Ben, his face a mask of furious helplessness. She looked at Eleanor, whose fierce intellect was now struggling against the sheer maliciousness of the attack. We don't fight lies with more lies, Clara said, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. We fight them with truth, and we fight them with the one thing they can't control, our shared history, our shared love for Silas, and our shared faith in each other. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. And how do we do that, dear, when they're poisoning the well? We don't try to prove them wrong, Clara continued, her mind racing, a new melody beginning to form in the quiet corners of her thoughts. We show them what Silas truly was. We tell his story, not through their twisted narrative, but through ours. And we do it tomorrow morning, on that dock. Ben, still reeling from the news, looked skeptical. But what about the media? They'll just parrot whatever the dredging company says. Not if we give them a better story, Clara countered, a spark igniting in her eyes. A story of courage, of community, of defiance, a story that reminds Oakhaven of who Silas truly was and what we stand to lose if we let these lies take root. She looked at Martha. Martha, what was Silas's favorite song? The one you both loved? The one that meant something to him? Martha, startled, slowly lifted her head. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a fragile blossom amidst her sorrow. Oh, Silas. He always loved the Fisherman's Hymn. It was an old folk tune, not widely known, but his father sang it, and his father before him. It spoke of the sea's bounty, the hard work, the faith required to make a living from the ocean. Clara nodded, a new sense of purpose solidifying. Good. We'll teach everyone the Fisherman's Hymn. And tomorrow, we won't just protest. We'll sing it. We'll play it. We'll tell Oakhaven who Silas Maris truly was, with every note. Eleanor clapped her hands together, a renewed vigor in her movements. Brilliant! A communal song! It's harder to dismiss an entire town singing in unison than one lone voice, no matter how powerful. She turned to Ben and the others. We need every single person we can get to spread this. Call everyone. Tell them about the lie, and tell them we're fighting back. Tell them to come to the docks at dawn and to learn the Fisherman's Hymn. The night became a flurry of activity. Phone calls were made, text messages flew through the sleepy town. Clara, with Eleanor's help, meticulously jotted down the lyrics and a simplified musical notation for the Fisherman's Hymn, photocopying it on a creaky old machine in Eleanor's living room. Ben and his friends managed to retrieve the church hall piano, a heavy, dust-covered upright, and carefully loaded it onto a flatbed trailer, securing it for its journey to the docks. As the first hint of pre-dawn light began to paint the sky with bruised purples and oranges, Clara stood on the deserted dock, the cold Atlantic wind whipping around her. The old piano, looking incongruous and vulnerable against the vast backdrop of the ocean, stood ready. The dredging company's massive vessel, the Oakhaven Guardian, already hummed with a low, menacing thrum, its demolition crew preparing. Mr. Sterling's sleek black SUV was already visible, parked strategically on a rise overlooking the scene, a silent sentinel of his power. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at Clara. This was it. This was the moment. She was putting everything on the line, not just her career, but her very sense of self. Could she truly rally a town, still reeling from a devastating lie, with nothing but an old piano and a forgotten song? Then, in the distance, she heard it. A faint murmur growing steadily louder. Figures emerged from the pre-dawn gloom, a trickle that quickly swelled into a steady stream. Townspeople, young and old, wrapped in coats and scarves, their faces tired but determined, converging on the dock. Martha Maris, supported by a neighbor, was among them, her head held high. And behind them, she could see two cars pull up, one with the unmistakable branding of the local news channel, the other a battered sedan with Oakhaven Weekly emblazoned on its side. Mr. Sterling, watching from his SUV, seemed to tense, his casual, victorious posture slipping. He hadn't expected this turnout. He hadn't expected them to fight back so quickly, so publicly. As the crowd gathered, Ben distributed the photocopied lyrics and music for The Fisherman's Hymn. Clara took her place at the piano, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The dredging company's crew, clearly under orders to proceed regardless, began to swing. The Oakhaven Guardian's massive demolition arm towards the Sea Spirit. The metallic groan of the machinery filled the air, a harsh counterpoint to the rising murmur of the crowd. Clara took a deep breath, her fingers finding the keys. She began to play, not the elaborate masterpiece of the gala, but a simple, heartfelt melody. The Fisherman's Hymn, its ancient notes echoing with the history of Oakhaven. Her gaze met Martha's, then swept across the faces of the assembled townsfolk. This wasn't just a song. This was a battle for the soul of their town, and the dredging company was about to discover that some legacies could not be so easily silenced or destroyed, especially when a whole town was ready to sing its truth. The first note resonated, clear and strong, and the demolition arm paused, its mechanical roar momentarily subdued by the unexpected music. The fight for Captain Maris's legacy and Oakhaven's future had truly begun. The first notes of The Fisherman's Hymn, clear and unwavering, cut through the pre-dawn chill and the harsh groan of the Oakhaven Guardian's demolition arm. The massive machine, its claw hovering menacingly over the Sea Spirit, paused. Its operator, a young man with a grim expression, seemed to hesitate, glancing down at the unexpected sound. It was a fleeting victory, but a victory nonetheless. Clara played, not with the fiery passion of her gala performance, but with a quiet, profound reverence. The hymn was simple, ancient, woven into the very fabric of Oakhaven's history. Its melody spoke of perseverance, of faith in the sea's bounty, of the unbreakable bond between man and ocean. She played for Silas, for Martha, for every fisherman whose life had been shaped by the unpredictable, beautiful, and often brutal rhythms of the Atlantic. The crowd, initially hesitant, began to find its voice. Ben Carter, standing tall among his fellow fishermen, started to sing, his voice a little rough, but steady. Then Martha Maris, her eyes fixed on Clara, her voice trembling but gaining strength with each word, joined in. Eleanor Vance, her arm linked with a neighbor's, sang with the conviction of a woman who had taught generations the importance of truth. One by one, then in small groups, the people of Oakhaven, clutching their photocopied lyrics, began to sing. The hymn rose, a swelling tide of communal voice, mingling with the cries of gulls and the insistent slap of waves against the dock. It was a sound steeped in sorrow, but also in an unyielding defiance. The music wasn't just a protest, it was a reaffirmation of who they were, a direct challenge to the lies that sought to define Captain Maris. Reporters, their microphones extended, cameras flashing, initially focused on the demolition crew, then swung to capture the unexpected spectacle of a town singing a centuries-old hymn at dawn. This was a story far more compelling than a simple boat scrapping. From his SUV, Mr. Sterling watched, his face darkening with each rising note, each additional voice joining the chorus. His plan was unraveling. The calculated smear campaign was being met, not with counter-arguments, but with song, with unity, with an emotional resonance he couldn't possibly combat. He rolled down his window, barked an order into his phone, his voice tight with frustration. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the vehicle. It was not one of his suited henchmen, but his wife, Evelyn Sterling. She was a woman known for her polished composure, her perfectly coiffed hair, and her cutting remarks. But today, her face was pale, drawn, and her eyes held an uncharacteristic flicker of something akin to fear. She walked briskly towards the dock, her gaze fixed on Clara. "Clara Albright." Evelyn's voice, though sharp, was thin against the rising chorus. "Stop this at once. You are creating a public disturbance. This is illegal." Clara, her fingers still dancing across the keys, merely glanced at Evelyn, then returned her focus to the music. The hymn continued, undeterred. The crowd, emboldened, sang louder, their voices weaving into an unbreakable chord. Evelyn, accustomed to immediate obedience, flushed crimson. She tried to physically block the camera lens of a local news crew, then spun back towards Clara. "You have no idea the forces you are up against," she hissed, trying to wrench the sheet music from the stand. Before she could, Ben Carter stepped forward, placing himself between Evelyn and Clara, his imposing frame a silent barrier. "She has every right to play," he said, his voice low and steady. "We have every right to sing. This is Oakhaven, Mrs. Sterling, not your private club." Evelyn's eyes, wide with shock at being defied so openly, darted to Ben, then back to the determined faces of the singing crowd. Her gaze landed on Martha Maris, whose tears had dried, replaced by an expression of fierce, unshakable dignity. Evelyn seemed to shrink under the weight of so many condemning eyes. The power she and her husband wielded relied on fear and silence. Here, in the face of defiant song, that power felt hollow. Then, from the crowd, a new voice emerged, cutting through the hymn. "Evelyn!" It was Eleanor Vance. She walked deliberately towards Evelyn, her expression stern but tinged with a deep sadness. "Do you remember Silas, Evelyn? Before your husband's dredging company arrived, before all this?" Eleanor's voice softened. "You used to dance with him at the annual Lobster Fest, remember? You laughed with Martha at community potlucks." Evelyn's face visibly crumpled. The words, simple and direct, were a potent reminder of a time before the corrosive influence of power and greed had poisoned their relationships. She looked away, a flicker of guilt, or perhaps shame, crossing her features. The meticulously crafted facade of indifference cracked. The demolition crew, confused by the unfolding drama, the cameras, and the sheer volume of the singing crowd, had lowered the claw completely. The foreman, a burly man named Gus, who had lived in Oakhaven his entire life, climbed down from the Oakhaven Guardian. He walked towards the boat, his eyes fixed on the sea spirit, then on Martha Maris, then on the singing crowd. He had known Silas Maris, respected him. The dredge company's orders were clear, but the will of his town, the undeniable emotional current of the moment, was equally powerful. Clara, sensing a shift, allowed the hymn to fade slightly, replacing it with a quiet, improvisational melody, a hopeful undercurrent that spoke of resilience, of healing. It was the music of a community finding its strength. Gus, the foreman, stopped at the edge of the dock, just feet from the sea spirit. He looked at the boat, then at Martha, then at the assembled townsfolk. He slowly pulled a tattered handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his brow, his gaze troubled. The sound of the hymn, a collective plea, seemed to press in on him. He knew the truth of Silas Maris, just as everyone here did. The drug overdose story was a blatant lie. Finally, he turned to face Mr. Sterling's SUV, which still idled on the rise. He took a deep, visible breath. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, Gus pulled out his own phone, made a quick call, and then, in a voice loud enough for the reporters to catch, shouted, "Demolition suspended! Repeat, demolition suspended!" A cheer erupted from the crowd, loud and triumphant, momentarily drowning out the last lingering notes of Clara's piano. Martha Maris let out a sob of relief, collapsing into Eleanor's arms. Ben Carter pumped his fist in the air, a wide grin breaking across his face. From his SUV, Mr. Sterling's face was a mask of utter disbelief and incandescent rage. He had lost control. He had been outmaneuvered, not by legal papers or corporate maneuvering, but by a piano, a song, and the unbreakable spirit of Oakhaven. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel, revved the engine, and peeled away, tires squealing, leaving Evelyn stranded on the dock, watching her husband's furious retreat. But Clara knew this wasn't the end. Mr. Sterling was a wounded beast, and a wounded beast was often the most dangerous. He had retreated, but he would return, more determined than ever to crush their defiance. And now, he had the added humiliation of Evelyn witnessing his defeat, a subtle crack in his carefully constructed image of invincibility. What new, more devastating retaliation would he unleash against Oakhaven and its brave, singing souls? The victory felt sweet, but precarious, like a fragile melody played against a gathering storm. Mr. Sterling's furious retreat, tires squealing against the cold asphalt, left a vacuum of silence in its wake, broken only by the triumphant cheers of the Oakhaven townsfolk and the gentle lapping of waves against the dock. Evelyn Sterling, abandoned and visibly shaken, stood motionless, a lonely figure in the growing light. Her perfect composure had finally shattered, revealing a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of the woman Eleanor had reminded them all about. Clara, still at the piano, felt a surge of exhilaration, quickly followed by a bracing awareness. The battle of the sea spirit was won for now, but the war with Mr. Sterling and the powerful forces behind him was far from over. His humiliation would only fuel his vengeance. The local news crews, seizing on the drama, swarmed Gus, the foreman, demanding answers. The reporter from the Oakhaven Weekly quickly interviewed Martha Maris, her voice stronger now, imbued with a fresh dignity. Ben Carter, surrounded by fellow fishermen, spoke passionately about Captain Maris's integrity and the truth of the dredging company's illegal activities. The story was no longer just local, it was gaining traction. The image of a defiant town, singing its truth against a backdrop of corporate greed and a looming demolition, was irresistible. Eleanor, her face flushed with pride, hugged Clara tightly. "You did it, my dear. You woke them up. You woke us up." But even as they celebrated, a new wave of unease began to ripple through the crowd. Mr. Sterling's influence ran deep, intertwining with the town's economy like invasive roots. Gus, the foreman, already looked pale, knowing the consequences of defying his corporate masters. Other townsfolk, who had cheered so loudly, glanced nervously towards the direction Mr. Sterling's car had vanished. The joy was exhilarating, but the price of defiance was yet to be paid. True to Clara's premonition, Mr. Sterling's retaliation was swift and calculated. By midday, word spread like wildfire through Oakhaven. Gus, the foreman, had been fired, escorted off the premises of the Oakhaven Guardian by grim-faced security. His family, who relied on his steady income, faced an uncertain future. This wasn't just punishment. It was a chilling message to anyone else who dared to defy the dredging company. Then came the second blow. The lease review for Clara's piano studio was formally terminated. Her eviction notice arrived by courier, demanding she vacate the premises within 48 hours. Her livelihood, her professional home, was gone. "He's making an example of you, Clara. Eleanor said, her voice heavy as she helped Clara pack her music books into cardboard boxes. The small, sun-drenched studio, once filled with the joyful cacophony of children's scales, now felt cold and desolate. He wants to ensure no one else dares to stand up. And Gus, Clara said, her voice tight with anger and guilt. He lost his job because of us. Gus knew the risks, Eleanor replied, though her expression was grim. He stood with us. That's what matters. But this is different. He's trying to isolate you, Clara, to cut off your support. As if on cue, the phone rang. It was the principal of Oakhaven Elementary, informing Clara that her contract to provide piano enrichment classes was immediately terminated, citing unforeseen budgetary adjustments and community concerns. Another source of income, gone. The financial noose was tightening. The crushing weight of these retaliations threatened to overwhelm Clara. She had lit a fire, but now the flames threatened to consume her. Was the cost too high? Could she ask the town to continue this fight, knowing the personal ruin it could bring? Later that evening, exhausted and disheartened, Clara found solace in Ben Carter's shed, the place that now felt more like a refuge than her empty studio. Ben, along with Martha Maris and several other fishermen, were waiting for her. The mood was somber, heavy with the news of Gus's firing and Clara's evictions. "This is getting ugly," one of the fishermen, a gruff man named Joe, muttered. "Sterling's not playing games. He's going to crush us all." "He's trying to," Clara agreed, her voice quiet. "And he's starting with me." She looked at Martha. "Martha, I don't know if I can keep this up. He's taking everything." Martha Maris, her eyes now burning with a quiet intensity, reached out and took Clara's hand. "Silas lost everything, Clara," she said, her voice firm. "He lost his boat, his license, his health. But he never lost his spirit. He never stopped fighting for what was right. And you brought that spirit back to life." She squeezed Clara's hand. "Don't you dare let him take that from you. Don't you dare let him silence you. Or Silas." Her words, though gentle, were a powerful rebuke, a renewed call to arms. They reminded Clara of why she had played, why she had dared to defy. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Captain Maris's honor, about Oakhaven's future. "But what do we do?" Ben asked, frustration lacing his voice. "He's too powerful. He owns half the businesses in town. He's got the council wrapped around his finger." Clara looked around the small, makeshift meeting place. The worn tools, the nets hanging from the rafters, the scent of salt and fish. It was all so authentically Oakhaven. It was real, unlike Mr. Sterling's hollow promises and manufactured unity. "We find his weakness," Clara said, a new resolve hardening her features. "Every powerful man has one, and Sterling, he's overplayed his hand. He underestimated us once. He'll do it again." Eleanor, who had been listening intently, nodded. "He cares about his image, about perception, and he despises anything that makes Oakhaven look anything less than perfectly harmonious and prosperous under his leadership. He's all about control, Clara. Absolute control." A thought sparked in Clara's mind, a fragile but persistent idea. "Control," she repeated. "Yes. What if we exposed the truth about his control? Not just about the dredging, but about how he manipulates this town, how he silences dissent." She paused, then looked at Ben. "Ben, do you still have those documents Captain Maris collected? The evidence he had against the dredging company's illegal dumping?" Ben's eyes widened. "They're still in his strongbox at Martha's house. I was helping her clear out some things last week. Didn't think anyone would look at them now. We need them, Clara declared. And we need proof of the lies he's spreading about Captain Maris. Something irrefutable that can expose his entire operation. She knew this was dangerous. Digging into Mr. Sterling's affairs, armed with evidence, would paint a target squarely on her back. But the fight had escalated beyond quiet defiance. It was time for a direct confrontation. We need to hit him where it hurts the most, where his power truly lies. Not just his money, but his carefully constructed public image. As they spoke, a dark shadow fell over the shed's entrance. A figure stood silhouetted against the dim outside light. It was Evelyn Sterling, her face etched with a desperate urgency. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to talk to you. I know things. Things about my husband. Things that could ruin him. Things that could save Oakhaven. But if he finds out I'm talking to you, he'll destroy me." Her admission was a desperate plea, a confession of her own fear and complicity, but also a hint at a deeper, darker truth lying hidden beneath Oakhaven's placid surface. He keeps a ledger in his private safe, a ledger that details everything. Evelyn Sterling's whispered confession. He keeps a ledger in his private safe, a ledger that details everything, hung in the air, thick with unspoken danger. The shadowy figure of Mr. Sterling's wife, her face pale and drawn, was a potent symbol of the fear that pervaded Oakhaven. Her admission wasn't just a revelation. It was a desperate plea for help, an admission of her own complicity, and a clear indication of the depths of Mr. Sterling's deception. Clara, Ben, Martha, and Eleanor exchanged stunned glances. A ledger, the Holy Grail, the definitive proof they desperately needed. But the risk was immense. If Evelyn was caught, Mr. Sterling would unleash a wrath far more devastating than anything Oakhaven had yet seen. "Everything?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on Evelyn. "What kind of details?" Evelyn wrung her hands, her gaze darting nervously towards the shed's entrance. "Illegal dumping permits, bribes to council members, falsified environmental reports. Shell corporations used to acquire fishing leases from struggling families, then sell them to the dredging company at inflated prices. And the pressure they put on Silas. All of it." Her voice dropped even lower. "It even details the anonymous tips about Silas's supposed drug use, planted by Mr. Sterling himself to revoke his license." A gasp rippled through the small group. The sheer depravity of manufacturing such a lie against Captain Maris was sickening. This wasn't just greed, it was malice, a deliberate act of destruction. "And where is this safe?" Eleanor asked, her voice sharp with renewed purpose. Evelyn hesitated, her eyes wide with terror. "In his study, behind a false panel in the bookshelf. He keeps the key, on his person, always. Or sometimes in his desk drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old land deeds. He's paranoid. He knows what's in there." The plan was audacious, dangerous, and required precision. To break into Mr. Sterling's mansion, to steal a ledger from his private safe. It was almost unthinkable. But the weight of Martha Maris's suffering, the injustice to Captain Maris, and the growing oppression of Oakhaven pressed on Clara with an undeniable urgency. This ledger wasn't just evidence. It was their shot at redemption. "We can't ask you to do this, Evelyn," Clara said, her voice gentle. "The risk is too high." Evelyn looked at them, then down at her hands, her shoulders slumping. "I know, but I can't live like this anymore. Watching him, knowing what he's doing to this town, to people like Silas, and what he's done to me, I can't. She met Clara's gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I want to help. If you can get the ledger, I'll tell you the combination to the safe. He changes it every month, but I know this month's. The revelation of Evelyn's profound unhappiness, her quiet desperation, was a poignant detail in the larger drama. She was a prisoner in her own gilded cage, desperate for escape. The decision was made. The stakes were impossibly high. Clara, Ben, and Eleanor would attempt to retrieve the ledger. Martha would stay behind, a beacon of hope and a reminder of the justice they sought. The next few hours were a blur of frenetic planning. Evelyn, fueled by a mixture of fear and a fragile resolve, provided details of the mansion's layout, security system, minimal as Mr. Sterling believed his intimidating presence was enough, and his predictable schedule. He would be at a late-night council meeting, a deliberate act of control, expecting the town to be busy nursing their wounds. "He's always home by midnight," Evelyn warned, her voice trembling. "Sometimes earlier if he's had a particularly satisfying evening of putting people in their place." Their window was tight, a mere 2 hours. Under the cloak of darkness, the night air thick with the scent of pine and salt, Clara, Ben, and Eleanor drove to the outskirts of Oakhaven, parking Ben's battered truck deep in the woods bordering Mr. Sterling's sprawling estate. The mansion, a monolithic structure of stone and glass, loomed in the distance, bathed in the cold glow of security lights. "This is insane," Ben muttered, his hand on the cold metal of a crowbar he'd brought, a tool of his trade now repurposed for breaking and entering. "Necessary," Eleanor corrected, her voice firm. She carried a small toolkit, a relic from her days as a DIY enthusiast. Clara, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, carried nothing but her resolve. She felt a strange mix of terror and exhilarating clarity. This was the crescendo, the ultimate chord of her defiance. They moved like ghosts through the shadows, skirting the manicured lawns. Eleanor, with surprising agility for her age, disabled a motion sensor light. Ben, using his knowledge of old construction, found a window on the ground floor that wasn't fully secured. Inside, the mansion was a cavern of opulence and silent judgment. Every step on the polished marble floors echoed. The air was heavy with the scent of expensive cigars and the implicit power of Mr. Sterling. They navigated through vast, impersonal rooms, following Evelyn's whispered instructions. Finally, they reached the study, a large, imposing room filled with leather-bound books and dark wood. The bookshelf Evelyn described stood against the far wall. "He usually keeps the key in his desk, under the third stack of deeds," Evelyn had said, her voice a thin thread of hope. Ben began carefully prying at the false panel in the bookshelf, while Eleanor, ever meticulous, began to sift through the stacks of documents on Mr. Sterling's ornate desk. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft creak of the wood and the frantic beat of Clara's own heart. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking threat. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room as Ben managed to dislodge the panel, revealing a small, dark recess where a safe was nestled. At the same moment, Eleanor let out a small gasp. "Here, the key," she whispered, holding up a small, ornate silver key. Clara's hands trembled as she took the key. Evelyn's combination was whispered to her, a string of numbers that felt impossibly fragile. With agonizing slowness, she entered the code, the tumblers clicking with agonizing slowness. Then, with a soft thunk, the safe door swung open. Inside, Tucked beneath a stack of old legal papers lay a single leather-bound ledger. Its pages were thick, filled with neat, incriminating script. This was it, the truth. As Clara reached for it, a sudden, piercing alarm blared through the mansion, echoing through the night. Not a security alarm, but the distinct, jarring ring of a phone, a direct line from the front gate to the study. Then, a low, guttural voice, distorted by the speaker, rumbled through the room. "Mr. Sterling is returning. He's at the gate." Their window had slammed shut. He was early. Footsteps echoed from the distant entrance hall, growing rapidly louder. They had the ledger, but now they were trapped, with Mr. Sterling just moments away from discovering them, and the evidence of his ruin, right in his own study. There was no time to escape, no obvious way out. They were caught. The chilling announcement, "Mr. Sterling is returning. He's at the gate," plunged the study into a frantic, heart-stopping panic. The thud of distant footsteps, growing steadily louder, hammered against Clara's eardrums, each beat a stark reminder of their rapidly dwindling time. She clutched the heavy, leather-bound ledger to her chest, its pages feeling like a ticking bomb. They were trapped. "Quick, hide!" Eleanor hissed, her voice a strained whisper, her eyes darting around the massive study. Ben, his face pale, grabbed Clara's arm. "No time! He'll be here in seconds! We need to move!" He scanned the room wildly, his gaze landing on a large, heavy velvet curtain covering a tall window recess. "This way!" He tugged at the fabric, revealing a small, dark alcove behind the window, barely large enough for 2 people, let alone 3. "It's all we've got." Without another word, Clara and Eleanor squeezed into the narrow space, pulling the heavy curtain closed just as Mr. Sterling's voice, sharp and imperious, echoed from the hall. "Evelyn, are you awake? Why is the front gate alarm on?" Ben, with a desperate surge of adrenaline, saw a small, ornate closet used for storing liquor and cigars, a few feet from the curtain. He dove inside, pulling the door shut just as the study door creaked open. Clara, pressed against the cold glass of the window, could hear Mr. Sterling's heavy footsteps enter the room. Her heart hammered against her ribs, threatening to burst through. She could almost feel his presence, his fury, radiating through the thin fabric of the curtain. "Evelyn!" he called out again, his voice closer now, laced with annoyance. "What in the blazes is going on?" Silence. The air in the alcove was stifling, thick with dust and the scent of old velvet. Clara held her breath, the ledger still clutched tightly against her. She heard him cross the room, heard the faint creak of his desk chair as he sat down, then the sickening crunch of something being stepped on. "What in the—" Mr. Sterling's voice was sharp, puzzled. Clara risked a tiny peek through a gap in the curtain. He was standing by the bookshelf, stooping to pick something up. It was a small, ornate silver key, the key to his safe, the one Eleanor had found. In their haste, it must have slipped from her grasp as they hid. A wave of cold dread washed over Clara. He would see the open safe. He would know. Mr. Sterling's eyes, sharp and intelligent despite his initial confusion, landed on the still-ajar safe door behind the false panel. His brow furrowed. He walked slowly to the safe, his movements deliberate, terrifying. Clara closed her eyes, bracing herself for his roar of discovery. This was it. They were caught. But then, an unexpected sound. A soft, rustling movement, and a whispered, "Darling, is everything all right?" It was Evelyn. Her voice, though feigned, was laced with just enough sleepy concern to sound authentic. She had appeared in the doorway, her silk robe hastily tied, her hair slightly disheveled. Clara could feel the tension radiating from Mr. Sterling as he pivoted to face his wife. "Evelyn, the front gate alarm was triggered, and my safe is open," he said, his voice low, dangerous. His eyes were narrowed, suspicious. "Have you been in my study?" Evelyn walked slowly into the room, her gaze flickering to the open safe, then to the curtain behind which Clara and Eleanor were hidden. A flicker of fear, quickly masked by a carefully constructed performance, crossed her face. "You're safe? Open? What are you talking about, dear?" She feigned a yawn, stretching languidly. "I woke up when I heard the alarm. Thought perhaps you'd forgotten to disarm it properly, given how late you were out." She walked past him, a subtle move that positioned her closer to the safe, partially obscuring his direct view of it. "Perhaps you just left it open. You are getting rather forgetful, aren't you, with all your important business dealings?" Her words, delivered with a delicate mix of exasperation and thinly veiled insult, seemed to momentarily disarm Mr. Sterling. He bristled at the implication of forgetfulness. "I am not forgetful, Evelyn, and I certainly did not leave my safe open. Someone has been in here." His gaze swept the room, lingering on the curtain, a chilling moment where Clara felt his eyes almost pierce through the velvet. Evelyn, sensing the immediate danger, took a calculated risk. She placed a hand on his arm, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "Perhaps you merely thought you closed it, darling, or perhaps you wish someone had been in here to spice things up a little." Her gaze was direct, challenging, laced with a bitterness that belied the playful tone. She deliberately stepped closer to the safe, her body now fully blocking Mr. Sterling's direct line of sight to the open door and the exposed ledger. Her hand, subtly, almost imperceptibly, reached out, nudging the safe door closed. The click of the safe door latch was almost imperceptible over the pounding of Clara's heart. But it was there. Evelyn, with that single audacious move, had sealed the safe, protecting the evidence and, for now, their secret. Mr. Sterling stared at her, caught between suspicion and a raw, primal anger at her implied mockery. "Is that what you think this is, Evelyn? A game?" "Everything is a game to you, isn't it, dear?" she replied, her voice now colder, sharper. The veneer of playful seduction dropped, replaced by a cutting edge. "Huh. But some of us, your townspeople, your wife, are tired of playing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I find this conversation rather tedious, and I have no interest in your petty affairs." She turned on her heel, her silk robe rustling, and swept out of the room, leaving Mr. Sterling standing alone, fuming, his suspicion momentarily diverted from the curtain and the closet. The footsteps receded. Silence returned, thick and tense. Clara and Eleanor remained frozen, listening. After a few agonizing minutes, they heard the heavy click of the study door closing. Then, nothing. Ben slowly, cautiously, opened the closet door. His eyes, wide with shock, met Clara's. Eleanor, equally stunned, slowly pushed back the curtain. She closed the safe," Clara whispered, still clutching the ledger. "She knew what she was doing. She saved us." Evelyn's act of courage, her defiance of her husband, had been as powerful as Clara's piano masterpiece. But their relief was short-lived. Just as they began to gather themselves, a small, faint cry echoed from outside the mansion. A child's cry. Clara's blood ran cold. It was Liam, Ben's son. He must have followed them, perhaps out of curiosity or worry for his father. He was out there, alone, exposed. They had the ledger, the key to Oakhaven's freedom, but now a new, terrifying threat had emerged, and Mr. Sterling was still inside the house, undoubtedly still fuming, still vigilant. The stakes had just escalated beyond their wildest fears. Liam's faint cry, thin and vulnerable, pierced the tense silence of Mr. Sterling's study. It was a sound that turned Ben's blood to ice, erasing all thoughts of their escape route or the ledger still clutched in Clara's hand. His son. Out there. Exposed. "Liam?" Ben breathed, his voice a guttural whisper of pure paternal terror. He sprang towards the window, tearing back the heavy velvet curtain that had just hidden them. "Ben, wait!" Eleanor hissed, grabbing his arm, but it was useless. Ben threw open the window, peering into the pre-dawn gloom. Clara, her heart pounding, joined them. Just beyond the rose bushes, near the main driveway, a small figure huddled. Liam. He wasn't crying anymore. He was simply frozen, his eyes wide with fear, staring at something beyond the bushes. And then Clara saw it, the ominous shadow of Mr. Sterling, striding purposefully from the side of the mansion, his face a mask of furious vigilance, undoubtedly alerted by the front gate alarm and the strange activity. He was heading directly towards Liam. "He's seen Liam," Ben choked out, his hand already on the window frame ready to climb out. "No." Clara grabbed his arm, her voice urgent. "If he sees you, he'll know everything. He'll take Liam to punish you. We have the ledger. This is our only chance." A cold, agonizing logic settled over them. If Ben revealed himself now, the ledger's power would be diluted, twisted by Sterling's ability to retaliate against Liam. They had to get the evidence out, secure Liam, and expose Sterling on their own terms. But how? Suddenly, a new figure emerged from the shadows of the mansion's side door. It was Evelyn, her silk robe, her face still pale from her earlier performance, but now etched with a desperate resolve. She had heard Liam. She had seen her husband. Without a moment's hesitation, Evelyn moved. She didn't approach Liam, which would have drawn Mr. Sterling's immediate suspicion. Instead, she walked with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness towards the front gate, as if to inspect the alarm herself. Her movement, her presence, created a momentary distraction. Mr. Sterling, just moments from reaching Liam, paused, irritated by his wife's unexpected appearance. "Evelyn, what are you doing out here? Go inside." "I heard the alarm, dear," Evelyn replied, her voice now steady, imbued with a strange, chilling calmness. "Just ensuring our esteemed guests haven't caused any further damage to our impeccable property." She knew exactly what she was doing. With every word, she was drawing her husband's attention, creating a window of opportunity. As Mr. Sterling momentarily turned his attention to his wife, Liam, seeing his opportunity, darted into the deeper shadows of the rose garden, moving with the quickness of a terrified child. "Now, Ben," Clara urged. "Go! Through the woods, around the back. He'll follow you to our truck. I'll make a diversion here with Eleanor." She pressed the heavy ledger into his hand. "Protect this. Protect Liam." Ben squeezed her hand, a silent promise in his eyes, then slipped out the window, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness with the agility of a man who knew every inch of Oakhaven's coastline and its surrounding woods. Clara turned to Eleanor. "What now?" Eleanor, her face grim, pointed to the study door. "We confront him. There's no other way out, and we have the key to his undoing." She looked at Clara, a profound understanding in her eyes. "You have your masterpiece, Clara. Now play it." A new strength surged through Clara. She nodded, took a deep breath, and together they stepped out of the curtained alcove. Just as they did, Mr. Sterling, having lost sight of Liam and thoroughly exasperated by Evelyn, stomped back into the study. His eyes, cold and hard, swept the room, instantly landing on Clara and Eleanor standing by the now-closed safe. His face contorted, a primal rage twisting his features. "You!" he roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the room. "You meddling women! What in God's name are you doing in my house?" His gaze then fell upon the dislodged panel on the bookshelf and the open safe door, which Evelyn's quick thinking had only temporarily resecured. His face went white. He knew. "We came for the truth, Mr. Sterling," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady, even as her heart hammered. "The truth you've tried to bury, to silence." "Truth?" he sneered, advancing towards them, his eyes blazing. "There is no truth in Oakhaven but what I allow, and you, Miss Albright, you have just signed your own death warrant. And hers." He gestured menacingly at Eleanor. "And you think you can simply walk in here and take what's mine?" He grabbed a heavy bronze letter opener from his desk, its sharp blade glinting ominously. "We already have it, Mr. Sterling," Eleanor stated, her voice calm, a profound defiance in her gaze. She held up the small silver key, the key to your safe, and the key to your ruin. Mr. Sterling's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of murderous rage. He lunged for Eleanor, but Clara was faster. With an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she grabbed a heavy, leather-bound volume from a nearby shelf, a book on Oakhaven's maritime history, and swung it, not to hit him, but to block his path, creating a split-second diversion. The book met his outstretched arm with a dull thud. The momentary disruption was enough. Just then, Ben burst back through the window, Liam in his arms, his face grim but relieved. He saw Mr. Sterling, the letter opener, and the desperate standoff. "Stop right there, Sterling!" Ben bellowed, holding up the ledger, its familiar leather gleaming in the dim light. "We have it. All of it. And there are reporters waiting outside. You make one move against them, and this goes public immediately." Mr. Sterling froze, his gaze darting from the ledger in Ben's hand to his wife, Evelyn, who now stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes fixed on her husband with a mixture of terror and accusation. The truth, finally, was exposed. A sudden flash lit the study. The front door had burst open, and through it, the local news crew, led by the tenacious reporter from the Oakhaven Weekly, streamed in, cameras rolling, microphones extended. They had followed Ben and Liam, witnessing the boys' rescue, and had seen the light in the study. "Mr. Sterling." The reporter's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Is it true you've been bribing council members and falsifying environmental reports? What about the allegations of a smear campaign against Captain Maris?" Mr. Sterling, caught utterly off guard, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him, could only gape. His empire, built on secrecy and intimidation, was now exposed, unraveling live on camera. His eyes, filled with a desperate, trapped fury, darted from the ledger to the cameras, then to his wife, whose silent condemnation was perhaps the most damning of all. The following days were a whirlwind. The story of Oakhaven's courageous stand, Clara's piano masterpiece, and the damning evidence in the ledger exploded across regional and even national news. Mr. Sterling was arrested, his empire dismantled, his corrupt associates implicated. The dredging company's permits were revoked, their operations ceased. The Oakhaven community, bruised but no longer broken, rallied together. Gus, the foreman, was reinstated with an apology and back pay. Clara's eviction notice was rescinded, and her studio became a vibrant hub of music and community dialogue once more. The town council, purged of Sterling's cronies, began a process of transparency and true representation. And Captain Maris? His name was cleared, his honor restored. The sea spirit, battered but not broken, was finally released, and the townsfolk, with Clara leading a fundraising drive, began the arduous process of restoring it, piece by piece, as a monument to his courage. Martha Maris, her heart still heavy with loss, found a renewed purpose in tending to her husband's legacy, her eyes now holding not emptiness, but a quiet, enduring strength. As for Evelyn Sterling, she filed for divorce. Her face serene, liberated from her gilded cage, she moved back to her small ancestral home on the quieter side of Oakhaven, a silent testament to the second chances that often emerge from the wreckage of tragedy. Months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Clara stood on the newly revitalized docks, the air clean and sharp with the scent of the sea. The sea spirit, gleaming with fresh paint, swayed gently in its slip, almost ready to sail again. Children laughed as they chased each other across the pier. Clara sat at the old upright piano, now permanently installed on the dock, a gift from the grateful town. Liam, now her most enthusiastic student, sat beside her, his small fingers carefully picking out a melody. It was a new tune, one Clara had composed, a hopeful, soaring piece that wove together the sorrow of the past with the promise of Oakhaven's future. It was a melody of resilience, of community, of the unbreakable spirit of a town that had found its voice. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a blaze of orange and purple. The notes of Clara's new song, sometimes joined by Liam's earnest efforts, drifted across the water, a testament to the truth that some masterpieces aren't just about the music, but about the profound, lasting impact they have on the human heart, stirring a town to reclaim its freedom, one powerful, beautiful note at a time. The melody of Oakhaven, finally, was unbroken. And so, we leave Oakhaven, not as it was when the darkness of injustice first fell, but transformed, vibrant, and united. Clara Albright's defiant masterpiece at the gala was more than just a song. It was the spark that ignited a town's slumbering spirit, proving that even against the most formidable powers, a single voice, raised in truth, can resonate deeply enough to awaken an entire community. This story reminds us that courage isn't always found in grand gestures, but often in the quiet, unwavering resolve to do what is right, even when the cost is immense. It teaches us that love, in its purest form, love for a neighbor, for a place, for truth itself, can mend broken hearts and challenge the deepest injustices. From Martha Maris finding strength in grief, to Evelyn Sterling choosing liberation over complicity, to the townspeople rallying around a forgotten hymn, Oakhaven became a testament to the unbreakable human spirit. May we all find the courage to play our own masterpiece, to sing our own truth, and to stand with our communities, knowing that an unbroken melody of hope can always triumph over the discord of corruption. If this powerful story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more meaningful narratives that inspire and uplift. Your support helps us share these important tales.